It seems like Apple gained some ground, then Qualcomm gained some ground, and then vice versa. I mean, how do you expect this global battle to play out?
So it's going to play out over these small bumps in the road, the small roller coaster ride, inevitably, country by country, unfortunately. And I think to put some context on this, these headlines sound most concerning. Sound is, I think, the important word there. The substance is this is just purely noise. And ultimately, to answer your question, is how does this play out? We are going to see some varying degrees of announcements, both for Qualcomm and for Apple. But that doesn't change where the trajectory of the relationship between Apple and Qualcomm is going. And that relationship is moving in a different direction where they will eventually be separate. And you can point to some of the hires that Apple has had more recently in San Diego, similar to an acquisition they did about a decade ago where they started to build their own chips internally and vertically integrate. They want to do the same thing around technology that they currently license or are in dispute with around Qualcomm. So they have an option of moving in that direction. So the big picture, the simple reason why this is noise is that in the future, Apple is not going to be dependent on Qualcomm. And this irritation that is going on in the courts only accelerates that move for Apple.
The iPhone has been banned in other countries in other rulings pertaining to Qualcomm. I know that it mostly involves older models. So even if it's just older models potentially being banned, you think that's still just noise?
It is, and I think there's some dispute about which models under this most recent announcement are going to be banned. Apple uses Intel chips for their most recent phones. So most likely, to your point, it's going to be for some of the older phones. If you think about the simple exposure to Apple's business, let's say that the phones of kind of the iPhone 7 and before are banned in the U.S., and those customers don't purchase any Apple products, that probably has kind of a 5% headwind to the overall Apple business. So it is a measurable piece of the business. But importantly, I think I just come back to the central theme is that these customers likely are not going to make a decision based on a price point that's unavailable for them for $50 or $100 to jump to an Android phone. Apple has retention that has been steady for the iPhone between 90 and 95% over the past 5 years. And I think that availability or lack thereof of certain models isn't going to materially change that number in the near term.
Now, I want to get your thoughts on all of Apple's services announcements yesterday, but I want to start with streaming. Of course, we know that Apple unveiled its original streaming plans with much fanfare, lots of big celebrities, Oprah, Reese Witherspoon, but a lot of unanswered questions about when we'll be able to watch this content, how much is it going to cost. How big a deal is this new streaming plan that Apple is working on, not knowing the details?
Well, fortunately, we can fill in the details and agree that it's irritating that we didn't get a lot of the specifics, but I think we can back in there. So think of this as going to be a very similar price as what we see in the market today, which most of these streaming services are right around $15 a month. So it might be on the low end of that. So kind of a $10 per month. And then we can look at the number of ads that they've had in Apple Music as some sort of a benchmark for the next few years and think about where Netflix is at in terms of their subs as another kind of benchmark. And I think what you can build is a case for this video segment to be somewhere between 10 and $15 billion a year in revenue. Now, that would add kind of in of itself, call it around 4 or 5% to Apple's overall business. It does, importantly, not change the street expectations around services. For the street to have services doubling over the next 4 years, which is generally what most analysts are expecting, you need to have these type of new products like video. And so it is an important step, video, and definitely is an important step, but it is needed for Apple to kind of hit its marks that the analysts have set out for it.
And what about the new Apple News Plus service, which, of course, sort of builds on things Apple has tried to do before, though they haven't been, raging successes. And there's still some contention about just how much content from each of these publishers that have signed on will actually be available in Apple News Plus.
So of the 4 announcements, I think this was the one that was the most underwhelming, in part to try to resurrect the magazine business. I think is a losing game. People can get a lot of that same type of content in the photos and just through the web at large. And like you said, as the partners aren't quite there. Wall Street Journal is kind of the central partner. So when we think about the news opportunity, we think in 5 years that could be a $500 million business, $500 million, much smaller than where we think that their gaming segment and the credit card and what the video can be.
So the last two, Apple Arcade and Apple Card, which was perhaps the least expected, but maybe the most impactful of all these announcements. What's your take?
So Arcade, we put kind of a 15% probability that would come out. My take is that it's a big market, and that can be potentially a $3 billion a year business over the next 5 years. I think the part that really got me most excited on the margin was what's going on with the Apple Card. And for me, it is a step forward, a dramatic step forward. The other ones are variations in putting Apple's culture and position on the streaming market and the gaming market and the news market. But this, on the credit card, it's something that is very unique in adding transparency to the credit card. And I don't need to go through it feature by feature, but the simple analogy is think about your circles and your bands and bars around fitness, daily fitness. Imagine that kind of transparency with how you manage a credit card. I think it's going to be successful, and I think that it will be another example of one of those subtle things that people like about their iPhones. Not necessarily a huge business for Apple, but definitely helps maintain that high retention rate.